Hello and welcome to BarbWire Strategy. My name is Colonel Jim Love, and you are watching episode 2 of season 3 of BarbWire Strategy, brought to you by Alexandria. Briefly, I'll go over what I talked about in the last video, and that is that we had an ice storm back in February. It caused the pipes to burst above the garage, and the ceiling collapsed and into the garage, and I had to completely rebuild my wood shop from the basically from the ceiling down, so to speak, because I picked a different kind of ceiling out, and of course then I had to repaint it and reposition everything. And so these first 5 videos are over what I did. In this video right here, what I'm going to talk about is what it took to build a wood shop from the beginning. And actually, I built 2 wood shops. So there was a first wood shop, because I think this would be interesting and maybe helpful to anybody out there who would like to build a shop of their own. And so I'm kind of letting you know what was going on in my mind when I built my wood shops and why I built them. It looks like I keep looking over here, I'm having a lot of sound problems. I got a new iPhone. This doesn't do anything to the wood shop, but I got a new iPhone a couple of months ago, and it's great. It works fine. I got the superest, duperest, nicest, biggest screen. It's got all these cameras on it. Oh my gosh. It's, you look at it, it's like one of those old cameras from the 1950s, television cameras. But it's got all these lenses on it. But it's not meshing with GarageBand too well. And this Yeti gives me superior sound. And so for whatever reason, it just might cut off on me at any moment. So I have to watch it, otherwise I'll have really crappy sound. Anyway, getting back to the wood shop, I wanted to explain to you briefly why I built, or what my reasons were for the first shop that I built. In the first shop that I built, I had acquired a warehouse on I-35 in Fort Worth. I owned a recycling company, a scrap metal company, and it was a cash and carry business, and I carried a lot of cash. But I bought this entire warehouse. It was an old Quonset hut from World War II. And in the middle of it, I had a secured room. And my brother-in-law at the time, he's no longer my brother-in-law, Ed McKeon, and he was married to a sister of mine named Sandy. And he came to me, this was around in 1995. When I acquired this warehouse. And Ed came to me and he said, you know what? He says, I've always wanted to have a wood shop. And I was wondering if you'd like to go in as half partners with me on a wood shop. Well, I had always been interested in wood and working with wood. I'd had taken wood shop back when I was in middle school, but that was way back in the 1970s, the mid-1970s. And so I told him, he said, yes, I think that'd be cool. And I had plenty of money to get involved with it. And of course, we didn't know, I really didn't know what to buy or what machinery. And of course, we didn't have, well, I guess we had the internet in those days, but the internet then was, well, it's like working with this candlestick phone now compared to the iPhone. And so at the time, we just went to Sears and we started looking around and trying to judge at what we needed. Now, there's 4 principal tools everybody needs in a wood shop, and I can tell you those right now. One is a table saw, and the second is a band saw, and the third is a jointer, and the fourth is a planer. Now, in my wood shop, in all these years, decades, I have never bought a joiner or a planer. Not because I don't want one, and not because I don't think that they're useful. I do. But I haven't needed one because of the type of work I've done, and I'll get to that later on. But those are the four principal machines. Now you need other machines. I'm not telling you just go buy those four and you're set. But that's not necessarily true. There's lots and lots of different tools and machines and little things that really help you out in your wood shop. But anyway, Ed and I, my brother-in-law at the time, he and I went to Sears, and first thing we bought was a radio alarm saw and a table saw. A Craftsman Craftsman, it was a Craftsman table saw, I still have it, and a radio alarm saw made by Sears. And I still have that. And if you have a radio alarm saw, I'll tell you, don't get rid of it. They don't make them anymore because supposedly OSHA says they're unsafe. I don't think they're unsafe. You know what? Your shop is going to be as safe as you decide to prepare yourself to be. In other words, if you watch what you're doing and watch where you're placing your hands, then you're not going to be so big of an idiot to put your hands into the damn blade. Now, I have had a wood shop for decades now, and I have not sawed off nor even come close to sawing into any of my flesh because I pay attention to what I'm doing. Anytime your mind starts to wander or you start to get fatigued, and this is a safety thing for you, anytime your mind starts to wander or you start to get fatigued, stop what you're doing. Put your project aside, go in, get yourself something to eat, something to drink, maybe sit down, watch a little TV, go read a book, get your mind off of it. You can only work in a wood shop so long and do good work. And you can only work in a wood shop so long and not become fatigued. And when you get distracted or fatigued, that's when you start cutting things off. And so if you want to avoid any hazards in the wood shop, then pay attention to what you're doing. Now, anyway, Ed and I, we built our shop, and at first Ed had said, well, hey, he says, why don't we build it in my garage? And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, I've got this warehouse. He says, yeah, but that's over in Negro Town. You know, you don't necessarily want to have a shop over there. The crime rate's high and all this. And I said, well, no, wait a minute. I said, I've got a superior alarm system. And so I brought him over there. I showed him everything. And I said, and then I got this room in the center of the building, and it's fully secured. So we ended up putting it there at the Recycle It. The name of my company was Recycle It, my scrap metal company. It worked out great. We were partners for a long time until Ed got caught fooling around with my sister. And then at that point, they got a divorce. And I was very sorry about that because it meant that we were going to have to split up our wood shop. Actually, I had suggested we keep our wood shop together, but Ed said, no. He says, I can't have any more to do with anybody in your family and your sister. And so he was going to go his way. And so we amicably split up the machines, pick out whatever you want, and I'll replace it. It's not going to present any kind of financial issue to me. And so he did. And eventually I replaced the machines that needed to be replaced. Now that was my first shop, and that was from 1995, 1995 until the spring of 96 is when my sister caught him fooling around. And he went his way, and I've never had any ill feelings against him. I didn't marry him. My sister married him. I was partners with him in the wood shop, and he didn't fool around on me in our wood shop. In fact, let me say this about Ed. He went so far as to many times I'd be in that scrapyard on a Saturday afternoon, and there'd be customers lined out the door, and he'd come down. It was his only day to come down there and work on his little projects. He liked building these little bird feeder houses. And I remember several Saturdays this happened. He'd come down there and he'd say, hey, I'm going to come down and work. Is that a problem? No, come on down. And he'd get there and he'd see how covered up I was. Now, he was an insurance salesman by trade, but he would put his project off and he would help me for hours on end. Sometimes it would eat up all of his time. And then he'd turn around and he'd say, well, I've got to go home now because I've run out of time. And I'd try to pay him. He wouldn't take the money. He was a really nice guy. I mean, a lot of my family didn't like him, but I haven't forgotten what he did when when I was in a pickle on a Saturday afternoon and had customers lined out the door. Anyway, that wood shop ended, and then we're going to speed ahead to 10 years later. In 1997, I decided that I was going to, actually in 2006, I decided I was going to build my wood shop here at the Ivory Tusk. And I started preparing for it, I guess you could say, in the fall of 06. But then when I really started working on it was in around February of 07. As soon as it warmed up a little bit, I don't like to work in the wood shop when it gets too cold in January and part of February. But as soon as it starts getting a little bit warm in the daytime, then that's when I'll go out, because I don't have a big heater out there. Anyway, I started working on this because what I wanted to do several years before this, actually 10 years before this, back in 1996, my cousin had come over to our apartment. We were living in an apartment at the time. And he came over and we were going to go to dinner, and I went and took a shower, and Marcus, his name is Marcus Butterly, and he started building this. We had Alexander's blocks out, and he started building this little castle thing. And I came out of the shower and was getting dressed, and I said, "What do you got there?" And so I took a picture of him when he built this thing, and he was an engineer by trade at that time. And so I said, what are you doing? He says, I got an idea. He said, what if you built a bunch of blocks only out of exotic woods instead of just maple? And then tried to educate people on these exotic woods from all over the world. And that stuck in my head for a long time. So speed ahead back to my story. In 2007, I decided that I would start making these blocks out of exotic woods and put them together and perhaps market them. But I got to the point where I thought, no, wait a minute. I think that it would be really cool if they made something. It's not enough just to have blocks that you stack up, because I remember being a kid stacking the blocks up and they all fall down. But what if they joined together in such a way that maybe some of them joined and some of them didn't, and you built something out of it? So I started on this idea. And I always liked the shape in geometry of the octagon. And so I started with the concept of an octagon, and the angle, by the way, that you cut those joints at so that they'll all meet up is 22.5 degrees. And so I started on this concept of building some piers, and then I started putting in pillars, and it took me a long time. And what this eventually became was the Palace of Alexandria. At first I call it the Alcatilian Palace, but now I call it the Palace of Alexandria. And this palace, and I'll go into detail about it later on because this is really on my wood shop, but I needed to mention the Palace of Alexandria because it was the main catalyst that got me to put a wood shop together to begin with, because everything that I bought for my wood shop was not just to build a wood shop. Every piece, every tool, every piece of sandpaper I bought was for the sole purpose of building the Palace of Alexandria. And as I say, I'll get into the Palace of Alexandria later on. I completely designed it and built it myself. It's over 10 feet tall, and it took me 10 years to build it. It's made out of I think it was 65 different exotic woods from all over the world, and it weighs well over 600 and 700 pounds. I don't have the paperwork on it right this second. But I wanted to mention it because it was the main catalyst for me building a wood shop. And as the years went on and I would come across, I would design some piece of the wood of the palace, and I'd figure out, okay, what do I need to make this piece? I would design it and then say, how am I going to do this? And little by little, I figured out on my own, okay, well, I need this tool and this tool. So I would go and I would buy those tools, bring them into the shop, put them in place. Now, one thing that I ran into in building a shop is, and to find out what that lovely little nugget of information is, you're going to have to tune in to part B of this. Yes, I know, I made another mistake. I This was only supposed to be 15 minutes long. The truth is, it took me 30 minutes to make this because I had so much I wanted to say. So I've had to break episode 2 into 2 parts, part A and part B. So if you'll just watch part B, you'll be able to find out what other information I have about building a shop. And then we'll move on to part 3 and 4 in this, where I tell you how I built my ceiling and painted the shop and did the logistics for it. So until then, I will see you next time on BarbWire Strategy. Watch part B.